Hi, my name is Andrea. I like to read, I like to write, and I like to talk about those things. Today, we're going to be talking about POV. What is it? What types are there? What did I choose? And what should you choose? So, as I'm sure most of you know, POV stands for point of view, and it's the perspective from which your story is going to be told. So, of course, it is incredibly important. This is the first or the main tool that you're going to use to tell your story. No matter what decisions you make regarding anything else, your genre, your plot, your characters, your storyline, all of this is going to be delivered through this perspective that you choose and that you develop. So it's an important decision and one that you really have to think about before you publish your book. You can change your mind while you're in the writing process, but if you do decide to change, or if you do go back and forth, you have to make sure that by the time you're ready to share this story with the world, it's consistent. You can take some risks with your POV. You can have more than one. You can even switch POV, and by that I mean first person, second person, but you have to be firm in these decisions. It can't seem like an accident because it's just gonna look unprofessional and you're kind of violating a sort of trust with the reader. I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of POV, or at least the types that I'm more familiar with. First, we have first person point of view, of course. Some examples of first person point of view are The Hunger Games and Catcher in the Rye, along with many other books that I'm sure you can think of. This is basically when the narrator or the main character is telling the story personally. He speaks in I, we. For example, if you were to read a sentence in first person, it would go something like, I went to the store and I was thinking about the fight that I had with my brother. We are hearing about this occurrence directly from the character who experienced it. Some things to take into consideration if you're thinking about going with first person POV is first, if I'm looking down because my notes are down here, sorry. First, what I think is the most appealing about first person point of view is that it creates an intimate relationship between the reader and the narrator or the main character. It also allows you to have a very interesting voice. For example, you see a lot in young adult that their narration can be a little less formal or a little more personal because it is told from someone directly. But the other side of that coin is that people can also get tired of hearing that same voice, because it's one thing to hear dialogue from one character in their particular way of speaking. It's another thing to be in their head and to read their every thought and everything that they experience in their own words. You do have less freedom. We're limited to what that narrator knows, what they experience, and because you're limited, this also has its pros and its cons. Since we only know what our narrator knows, you're not going to be able to see certain scenes because they aren't there for them. You can't have any dramatic irony. There isn't really any information that the reader knows that the main character does not. But it can also create a level of suspense, and you can play around with this information that the narrator doesn't know. it leaves space for misinterpretation, for conflicts revolving around this information that our narrator doesn't have. I'm not sure if I explained that in the best way, I'm sorry. Now, I'm going to skip second person point of view just because I don't have that much experience reading second person, and I don't really have any interest in writing from second person POV, so I'm sorry. Like I said before, I'm only gonna really talk about POVs that I'm more familiar with. So let's get into the third person point of view. So in case you didn't know, there are two types of third person point of view. There's omniscient and there's limited. So let's start with omniscient. Third person omniscient is when the narrator is kind of like a god. They are open to all the information. They can be in pretty much anyone's head. They have everything that happens in the story at their disposal. So a few traits to third person omniscient. First of all, it is less intimate than first person point of view. I read on a website, and I thought this was a really good way of putting it, that in first person point of view, you feel like you are the narrator, you are the main character, while in omniscient, you feel like you're watching them. It's kind of like watching a movie. A pro is that you can use dramatic irony. You can give the reader any information that you want to give them, whether or not your main character knows it. And the third person omniscient can give you a broader perspective of the story, which really just depends on the story you're telling. You have to take a good look at your story and figure out whether it needs that perspective or not. This is usually helpful for big, like, epic stories that have a lot of plot lines, like 100 Years of Solitude, which I didn't mention before is an example of third person omniscient. But you don't just have to choose between first person, third person. You also have to choose first who's gonna tell your story, and second, are they the only ones telling your story? If you're gonna have just one main character, then choose if it's gonna be first person or third person limited or whatever you want. But if you're gonna have a bigger cast of characters, then again, how many of them are going to tell your story, and how are they gonna tell it? Through third person omniscient, third person limited, but they kind of have turns telling the story, first person, and again, they have turns telling the story. How many narrators are you gonna have? Because if you have more than one, you still have to choose if you want a big selection of narrators, if you're just gonna have maybe 2 or 3. Generally, stories that have more narrators are big fantasies. For example, Rick Riordan in Heroes of Olympus uses several narrators for all of his books. And even then, you don't have to choose just one POV for all of your narrators. I feel like that's a more common thing to do, but there's always exceptions. For example, I've heard that in Carve the Mark, still haven't read it, but in Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth, apparently she has 2 narrators, and one of them narrates in third person and the other narrates in first person. So again, you can take liberties with your point of view. You just have to make a decision and stick to it once you decide to share your story. As for what I chose for my current work in progress, I chose to have 2 narrators, at least so far, and I'm not exactly sure why I made this choice, it just kind of, the story came to me like that. It didn't feel right to tell the story from the perspective of just one of these two. I couldn't choose between them. It was both of their stories. And I'm still not sure if I actually have decided on first person or third person. I started writing the story in first person, but then decided I wanted to change it to third, and now I'm not really sure anymore. Because here's the thing. The reason that I decided to change it to third person is because I was lazy. I thought that I didn't have to get to know my characters as well or make their thoughts as interesting or put as much effort into that narration if it was in third person, because there's a distance between the reader and the main character. I'm not saying third person is lazy. I'm saying that my approach to it was lazy, and I realized that no matter which I choose, I was still gonna have to put the work in. So having realized that, having grown a little, I do think that first person will probably be the best choice for my work in progress. But that's still undecided. It can still change at any moment. So when it's time to decide what point of view you're gonna use and which narrators you're gonna have, take into account how personal you want it to feel, how broad you need your perspective to be, what information your characters are gonna need, whose story is it, how important is a narrator to your story. Don't put characters in and don't make them narrate just because you like them or you think your characters will like them. They need to have a reason. There has to be a deliberate reason that you chose to have this character help tell the story. Whose story is this? And I've had several moments where I have doubted my narrators because I just wasn't sure if they were the best way to tell this story. I thought that it might be more compelling from another character's perspective, but then I realized that it wasn't just about any of these random stories in this magical world that I'm creating. It was the story of these two characters and how they develop in this magical world. Or at least for now. Again, a lot of things could change in this story. But yes, for now I'm writing from 2 points of view, and so far it's first person. Good luck choosing your narrators and your point of view. I have an Instagram devoted to reading and writing. I'm also on Twitter and Goodreads. I'll link to all that down below. And as I put on Instagram, I'm thinking about uploading on Mondays and Fridays. And I don't know if I should continue this kind of theme that I started, dedicating Mondays to writing videos and Fridays to more reading and bookish videos, because I would really like to talk about both. So I'd appreciate it if you let me know what you think, and thank you for watching. Bye.